Well, this is my situation. My body is getting much older, and it's giving me distress symbols saying that you're fatigued and you're stressing yourself too much. So as a result, I'm not going to be able to study as much, so things might not be as crisp and clear as I want them to be, because I'm going to have to rest. I'm going to have to sleep. And so I apologize if things aren't of the quality they should be. All right. We begin talking about 12th house horoscopes today, and we'll talk a little bit about clairvoyance. Now, normally when you talk about clairvoyance with a horoscope, you look to Neptune, because Neptune is the planet that has all of the imaginative and otherworldly qualities that we associate with clairvoyance. However, we're not going to study clairvoyance per se, but we're going to study something a little different than that, but related to clairvoyance. The study of what to do to become clairvoyant through horoscopes would be a different kind of talk. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but mostly we're going to talk about the 12th house, which is abstractly ruled by Neptune. We're trying to understand how the 12th house is a gateway to superconscious experience, of which we are now mostly unconscious. Clairvoyance is the beginning of entering into those realms. Now, there are many types of clairvoyance, but basically they can be put into two categories: voluntary and involuntary. As spiritual aspirants, we are interested in voluntary, controlled clairvoyance. However, most of the clairvoyance that is in the world is involuntary. And most of the involuntary clairvoyance is counter-evolutionary. Sometimes it happens that students like ourselves that are on the edge of developing controlled clairvoyance swing back and forth, sometimes voluntary, sometimes involuntary, but eventually we make it to a completely voluntary state. Now, sometimes spiritual aspirants know about positive control and negative clairvoyance. And we have to be careful because there are two uses of the word negative, and both of them apply to clairvoyance. The original use of negative with regard to clairvoyance is negativity as it is associated with mechanics. You say two gears are positive if they mesh with no slip. But if there is slip and the meshing is not perfect, that is called a negative match. And that means that with regard to opening vortices for clairvoyance, there's slip. It's not in control. The other use of the word negative is as something bad or something dark. And that also applies because most involuntary clairvoyants have a lot of darkness about them. It's probably best if we do not look down on people, but more or less treat them like they have an illness. And if we do that, it's a much better way than if we shun people because they have an involuntary clairvoyance. At the same time, we have to be careful about associating with people who have involuntary clairvoyance, because they are uncontrolled sensitives. And there are entities from the spiritual worlds that would take control of them And we ourselves, as part of our esoteric training, are becoming sensitive. And they will come around and bother us if we give them a chance. Now, Max Heindel tells us that developing voluntary controlled clairvoyance is a very painstaking and demanding process. It requires many hours of spiritual exercise sustained regularly for many years. We're not talking about something more dramatic. We're talking about something more subtle. The slightest change in attitude changes your whole clairvoyant perception of things. So we have to be, in order to see what we want to see or what we need to see to do what we have to do, we have to be able to get to exactly to the right place in the spiritual worlds. And if we stray off somewhere, there are all sorts of things that will take us off the beam very quickly. So that's one of the reasons for it. In order to be able to function well, we have to have exquisite self-control in terms of attitude. Another reason is if we have clairvoyance or if we have any other spiritual powers, we have to be in control and we have to be morally perfect, so to speak, because the same power that can be used to heal can be used to kill. And we certainly don't want to go around getting angry and blasting someone and, taking away their opportunity to do the same kind of thing we're trying to do. This is why the Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that aspirants to the higher life and to higher faculties must first be thoroughly imbued with love and with the highest kind of ethics possible, not in any way intruding into the consciousness of someone else. Max Heindel also tells us that it is so demanding to develop that faculty in a really good way that if most people knew what was involved in the process, they probably wouldn't even have begun the process because it is such a demanding thing. When Max Heindel talks about exercises for developing clairvoyance, he says regularity and persistence are important. But he says that for some time, for many people, there may not be results. He says some people will unfold clairvoyance in a few weeks or in a few months' time because they've done the work in the past life. That's what we're going to talk about tomorrow some in these talks. And other people may work their entire life without having any unfoldment. It all depends on what we've done before. Now we're going to start looking at horoscopes, and let's begin by looking at a very peculiar case. Someone who is destined to be a clairvoyant. Susan was sitting here. Someone who is destined to be a clairvoyant and who has the 12th house destiny that shows it, but in a very unusual way. This is the horoscope of Peter Hurkos. Peter Hurkos was probably one of the most famous clairvoyants in the 20th century. He was a house painter in Netherlands, and one day he fell from a ladder where he was painting the second story of a house, and he landed on his head. And he was in a coma for 3 days, and when he came out of the coma, he was moody and volatile, and he had blinding headaches, and he had some degree of clairvoyance. Now, as a child, he was a loner. People with Pluto in the first house are often, the first house is early childhood, are often loners. And he avoided the company of others. And that's the kind of thing that we expect when we have, well, where's my pointer here? There it is. That's the kind of thing that you expect when you have both the Sun and Saturn in the 12th house. This is somebody who is reclusive and who withdraws from the world. As a teenager, he dropped out of school and he spent a lot of time in the woods. Again, this whole 12th house tendency of getting away from the world. He was born with a caul over his head, and a caul is a kind of membrane over the head, and every society seems to have a different interpretation or superstition about that. But it was believed that he would be a clairvoyant because of that. Now, philosophically, this is an interesting situation, and the circumstances of it this is clearly a destiny thing. The 12th house is right destiny. And if you have something like Saturn in Taurus in the 12th house, that's the most unavoidable kind of destiny at all. Now, if we think about it, falling on your head is not voluntary. It's a tough, you don't take a dive off of a ladder to become clairvoyant. So there's a degree of involuntary nature to this. On the other hand, the Sun is in Taurus, in the nebular spot where the Pleiades are, and it forms an almost exact trine with Uranus. So this is somebody that does have a self-knowing, and he has a very, very good intuition. So there are some qualities in this that look positive, and there are some things that look uncontrolled. Now, exactly what his evolutionary status was is not clear. He was open and eager for psychological testing, and he claimed that he had an 87% accuracy with his predictions. However, several different parapsychological institutes studied them, and some said, yes, it was significantly above average or above randomness. Others said there was no indication of ESP. Now, the claim was that he was a remarkable psychometrist, and that he spoke languages even in his sleep that he had never learned or had never been trained in. So you can see that he's bringing something over from the other side, and probably something from a past life, but it's inconsistent. And with all of this inconsistency, where one laboratory will test him and he reads, yes, he does have it, and another tests him and he doesn't have it, it is likely that he was involuntary. And because a voluntary clairvoyant is, as Max says in the Cosmo Conception, you don't have any days off. You have to be there every day, no matter what the situation is. And his life bears this out. He was a great self-promoter. The Gemini rising is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is opposite to Jupiter. And that is doing things with a lot of hoopla. And so he promoted himself a lot and made a lot of exaggerated statements about himself. He claimed to have experience of both the past and the future, but he really didn't have any philosophy or any grasp of the spiritual worlds that were coherent or that held together. So, you know, that's a pretty good idea that he's having chance things in the inner worlds and not much more. On top of that, we know that he wasn't a benign clairvoyant in the fact that he charged for his services. And he didn't see himself as a spiritual person, at least usually not. He saw himself as a detective, and he claimed to have solved a lot of murders, including the Charles Manson murders. But the fact of the matter is that the Charles Manson connection with the Tate LaBanca murders was due to the confession of Susan Atkins, and it was not due to Peter Horkus. So it's there's something doubtful there. All of his solutions of crimes and his tests are in doubt. Especially the amazing Randy, who had one of the most anti-psychic people that you could find in the world, couldn't find anything with him. But that isn't, that's a funny thing. It's hard to be. How does the Bible say it? A prophet is not without honor except in his own home or in his own city or something like that. If people doubt you, that can close off. If you're not a strong clairvoyant, that can close you off. So, with Mercury conjoined to Saturn, there's a certain amount of insecurity, mental insecurity. And with that mental insecurity, he padded the way he say things so that it was a net that would catch more things than being precise predictions. So, on top of that, he even lied. And Mercury conjoined Saturn is frequently the indication of a liar. And with the opposition to Jupiter in there, you throw that in and he's a bullshitter. And, but these planets do sextile Venus, so he had a kind understanding of people. So it's, all right. I guess we said enough about that. Now, if one is not a voluntary trained clairvoyant, it's very difficult to determine the psychic status of someone else. As we just saw, that parapsychological testing may or may not be helpful, and it may introduce things into the psychic faculties that are counter to what is trying to be tested. Now, if you are a controlled positive clairvoyant, it's a simple matter. All you have to do is look at the aura of another person and see the way the vortices in the desire body are rotating and how the different facets of the inner bodies are situated, and you can tell fairly quickly whether someone is a clairvoyant or not. If in the desire body, if the currents sweep up the left side of the body and curve in, that is a positive clairvoyance. If they come up the right side of the body and curve in, that is an involuntary kind of clairvoyance. It's unfortunate that originally the words clockwise and counterclockwise were used because that led to some confusion. There has been someone that has been teaching in the centers all around the world that the diagrams in the cosmoconception are wrong, because if you look at the positive clairvoyant, the vortices are counterclockwise. Of course they're counterclockwise because you're looking from the outside. From the inside, they're clockwise. And so if you have the idea that it comes up the left, over and down, it's a better way of looking at it than clockwise or counterclockwise. All right, I guess I've gotten a little bit of feel here. The Bible tells us, by their fruits you shall know them. And the fruits of an individual are found in the life and the works of the individual. For example, if someone claims psychic powers, their fruits are their predictions. Almost without fail, you can tell somebody who is an involuntary clairvoyant, because they're very good when they're on. They're very good at predicting disaster or catastrophe, either large or small scale. But they're inaccurate and often don't do any positive things at all, predictions at all. And they're inaccurate when they try. This is because one of the reasons for opening up involuntary clairvoyance is if a person has irrational fears. Like Jean Dixon used to have an irrational fear of the Russians. Involuntaries also have periods of deep depression, and those often change their psychic state. So if a person is fearful and depressed, they need protection. And when a person starts thinking in terms of needing personal protection, they awaken an atavistic animal like clairvoyance, because an animal can look at another animal and say, oh, that's a predator, I got to get out of here, or I got to protect myself, or something like that. And that is the genesis of a lot of involuntary clairvoyance. It's that kind of negativity, that survival thing. In such a state, psychology awakens something that they can't control, but they do respond to. Now let's look at someone who became heavy for taking on an extremely large load of destiny that is just hard and heavy. This is the horoscope of Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. More than half of the planets are in the 12th house, so we're talking really about a lot of right destiny, a big destiny load. Now this house is 61 degrees large, and that's only possible at extreme latitudes like Scotland, where he was born, or Iceland, or Siberia, or Alaska, or northern Canada, or something like that. Conan Doyle was not born clairvoyant or psychic or anything like that. He was too well set into the world. His inner bodies were well integrated into the dense physical body. He was a successful physician. He was an adventurer going out on whaling boats. He was an athlete in several sports, and he excelled as a writer. He was also famous as a lover. Venus in Aries is sextile to Jupiter in the first house, and he was famous for his capacity to love. He loved both his wife and a very beautiful woman he was mutually in love with at the same time. But because of the Jupiterian quality, he was very ethical. And he and the other woman with whom he was mutually in love just maintained a friendship. So he not only loved, but he was very high-minded about it. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. The thing we most know, the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, are what we know Conan Doyle for. The super detective solving all sorts of problems. Now, in these talks we're looking at the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th. And the 4th house is where you solve personal problems. The 8th house is where you solve shared problems, like social work caseworkers have a lot in the 8th house because they solve the things that are in between people. See, the first third of the horoscope is personal. This is my personal body, my personal possessions, my personal relations. This is solving personal problems. Then you have shared expressions like children, shared working conditions, and pure sharing in relationships. And then you solve shared problems. Then you have universal expressions like philosophies or religions or things like that. Then you have universal responsibilities. You owe society its due. Then you have universal relationships, either cosmopolitan or friendship relationships. And the 12th house is solving universal problems. And a lot of them are solved in retreat, like in hospitals or mental hospitals or in artist studios or in laboratories or things like that, places of that kind. So Sherlock Holmes was a solver of problems that were not his own and that were not between two people, but impersonal problems, but he did it in writing. It was a vicarious kind of thing. All of the common signs are sometimes called vicarious signs. There's a kind of vicarious destiny where you can work out your past life things by serving other people. So the Sun is conjoined Uranus in Gemini, and that shows someone who has a very keen mentality that is based on intuition. They both trine the moon, so there is a extraordinary self-consciousness and a broad view of things. Gemini is a sign that does a lot of borrowing and lending. And Sherlock Holmes was not really developed exclusively from Arthur Conan Doyle. It was borrowed from the person of another Scotsman. There was a Scot that had unbelievable deductive powers. You can get his horoscope if you get an old book by Alan Leo called 101 Remarkable Horoscopes, and he had the horoscope of that man. That was a man, he'd look at your hand for a few minutes, and he'd look at the calluses or the absence of calluses and where they were and things like that, and he could tell you amazing things about your life, all from deduction. And taking that as his leading point, Arthur Conan Doyle produced Sherlock Holmes. So, at any rate, Conan Doyle was successful at sport and at medicine and phenomenally successful at writing. He made huge sums of money from Sherlock Holmes. Now, the 12th house is called the house of vicissitudes. And because we have, from past lives, since Lemuria, we've been accumulating more negative debt than we can work out in the lives. And so we have these entities all around us from all our negative things. And when they become ripe, or when we become strong enough to bring them to ripeness, they become a 12th house kind of thing. And so the 12th house is called the house of vicissitudes or of ill fate. So it's a house of ripe destiny. Now, most of us have developed that from the past. Arthur Conan Doyle took on a lot. He loved both his wife and his other woman. And his wife died. As is Saturn coming in now. And when his wife died, he married the other woman. They both felt it was ethical. And he quickly had 3 children. But he was still down from the loss of his wife. She had tuberculosis and died from that. And he had nightmares. He started having dark moods. And the dark moods are from the Pluto, which is conjoined to Mercury, being conjoined to, I'm running out, there we go, to Saturn. Square to Saturn. And there is nothing darker in the whole of astrology than negative aspects between Saturn and Pluto. And so what this does, it produces a really, really dark atmosphere. Then what happens, this is a very exact, this 7:35 versus 7:10, it's only 20 minutes from being perfectly exact. And it affects his state of mind, because Mercury is conjoined to Pluto, and so he has a dark negativity in his mind. Now, that's called an aspect complex, and it shows the state of mind in such a way that the whole atmosphere of the auric consciousness. Now, this led him to becoming deeply, deeply depressed. And the more deeply depressed he became, the more he became interested in negative spirituality. And when his son died, by his first wife, one of his sons died, and the death of a child is the hardest death of all. The death of parents, even if you're close to them, that's expected. And I talked to an old doctor once who had been around many deaths, and he said he's been with couples that had been together for 50 years, and one dies, and the other one takes it hard, but, they get over it. But he said the hardest thing for people to get over is the loss of a child, because that reverses the order of things, because you look to your children to succeed where you haven't succeeded. And you see promise for the future. It's sort of like you see the little nibs of asparagus coming up, and you say, aha, tomorrow there's going to be asparagus for me. It's that kind of thing. But, so he lost his son. And he went into deep depression, but he went wild with spiritualism. He spent enormous amounts of money on the Society for Spiritualistic Research. And by the end of his life, he was conducting a seance every day. And when there wasn't a medium available, he himself set himself forward for to be a medium, to have the spirits work on him. Very fascinating, because if you're not involuntary to begin with, and you are a positive controlled person, you take up mediumship, it does terrible things to your nervous system. I knew a young man once that he was so proud. He was training to become a medium, and he wasn't sensitive to begin with. And this was already after a few months, he was developing a twitch. You'd be talking to him, and his whole body would twitch like that, because he was making it do something it wasn't built to do. All right, but this is, at any rate, this is an example of working toward negative clairvoyance and the kind of attitudes that bring you to that. All right, let's leave that for a second and go back to the horoscope that we looked at several years ago. I always like going back to horoscopes that I've looked at before, because you see them all anew. This will be a little bit deviant from what we've been doing. Our purpose is to see the 12th house opportunities to go into the superconscious, into the kingdom of the gods. Now, with Arthur Conan Doyle, it was pretty heavily mental. And even though he had a lot of intuitive insight, he didn't have a lot of spiritual faith. And his destiny darkened his mind and made him negative and made him involuntary. Let's look at someone who potentially brought in a lot of hard destiny from the past. And we're going to look at this in a very, very curious way. This is a very, very curious man. This is Salvador Dali, the surrealist painter, who very unusual man. I remember at one time, back in the early days of television, when I was still living with my parents in the late 50s, they had these Sunday shows, like Omnibus and things like that, and they would have interviews with great people. and they had an interview with Salvador Dali. And during the entire interview, Salvador Dali had a beefsteak, a raw beefsteak on his forehead. And he was acting as if this was perfectly normal. What are you looking at me so strangely for? This is a man that liked a lot of ego attention. Sun Mars, this brazen, look at me kind of thing. He used to go to movie theaters, and in the middle of a movie, he would stand up and turn around and start giving a lecture to people in the movie house. Interesting guy. In this case, we have two planets in the 12th house, Pluto and Neptune. And both of them have benefic aspects. Pluto is sextile to Jupiter, and Neptune is sextile to Venus. And that's what we're going to focus on a little bit. Now, several years ago in the summer school, we looked at this horoscope relative to the horoscope of Salvador Guido Dali. And Salvador Guido Dali was an elder brother of Salvador Dali, who died before Salvador was born. And we looked at the two horoscopes side by side to see if one was the other. So that were there things between the horoscopes that would indicate that kind of thing. Our results at that time were moderately positive, but only a really good quality clairvoyant could tell for certain. This time, I'd like to ask the speculative question, is there something in this horoscope that would indicate that this individual needed to die in childbirth needed to die as a child before this rebirth? So, is there something here that indicates that he needed that? And when I asked that question and looked at the horoscope, I was surprised, very much surprised. The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that one of the main reasons that a person dies in childhood before puberty is because they need more moral education, which they get in first heaven. And first heaven is the higher desire world. And the most common reason for needing more moral education is because they didn't get their purgatory and first heaven in the life before this one. And the most common reason is that the vital body was disintegrated or destroyed before the memory record could be taken out of it. And so they had nothing to have their purgatory with. It isn't all lost because that information is in the memory of nature in the world of thought, but it's going to be a long time before we can reap that. So a person comes to birth and they die as a child, and then they get special training. Like, for example, the invisible helpers will take a young child or an infant or something like that and put them in the middle of a gunfight or a fist fight or something like that, and they feel those vibrations, and then they'll take and put them in an aura where a symphony is being played or something like that and feel those positive things. They are object lessons in what you can do with your consciousness and in morality. These are really fine things. Now, the most common reason why the records are lost at death is fire. If you're in a fire and your body gets burned up, that's what happens. If we look here, the 12th house, which means Mercury holds the key to the 12th house, which is past lives. And Mercury is between the two most fiery planets, the fiery Sun and Mars, which is certainly the most fiery planet. And they both square Saturn. And Saturn is in the 8th house, the house of death. So this is a likely indication of something like that. What makes it even more likely is the fact that it is in fixed signs. And there are 3 different kinds of destiny. There's pay-as-you-go destiny, which is associated with cardinal signs. You step on the rake and the handle comes up and bops you in the head. That's immediate pay-as-you-go destiny. But if you can't make it up in time, in the next life, you're given a chance to work it out through service, and that's common sign destiny. The common signs are the servants, like the nurses and the delivery people and people like that who serve other people. But the common signs are also the signs that are most likely to shirk work. And if you don't do it then you have must-do destiny, the ripest kind of destiny, the most unavoidable kind of destiny, and that's fixed sign destiny. And all of this is fixed sign destiny. So we can see that there is a likelihood that this person in the past has been associated with fiery death. Now let's look at the 12th house, which we're trying to study. Neptune in the 12th house is sextile to Venus. And Venus rules all of the higher desire world. Because Venus in Taurus especially is the force of attraction. It is by giving out self-sacrificing love you attract others to you. And in the higher desire world, the force of attraction is there. Now, Neptune means interaction with higher spiritual beings, which can be invisible helpers or hierarchical beings. And this indicates that there's a pretty good likelihood from powers from above. Don't necessarily mean authorities. In this case, it means spiritual authorities. Pluto in the 12th house is sextile to Jupiter. And the highest region of the desire world of the first heaven is the region of philanthropy. And Jupiter and Sagittarius are the planet and sign that most rule philanthropy. And Pluto and Jupiter represent someone who is a force for the good. So that this indicates that there is, from the immediate past, a very high likelihood that from higher beings in the higher desire world brought in things that help this person. The person has a need of it because Saturn square the Sun is pretty selfish, and Mars square Saturn is highly primitive. And so they have a need for that kind of help, and it's just neat the way the universe brings it off so that they get that kind of help. All right. We have one more horoscope, which, again, I have to give the caveat. We're going to look at only a very, very small part of this horoscope, and it's the kind of horoscope or kind of personality that is highly provocative, that there are many other things that you want to talk about. We're trying in these talks to investigate what the depth psychologists call the unconscious. We're using astrology to get at the unconscious. We began by working with the 4th house, which is the personal unconscious. We learned a little bit about the personal unconscious, but we didn't have time to look at a lot of things. We didn't look at solving personal problems like bad habits or addictions or personal quirks or things like that. Now we're trying to deal with the superconscious, which is kind of hard to do. Now, mystics like ourselves would call it the greater or macrocosmic spiritual worlds. If the personal subconscious is our bodies in the inner worlds of which we are not completely conscious now, the superconscious is the macrocosmic worlds like the etheric subdivision of the physical world, the desire world, and the region of the concrete subdivision of the world of thought. That's what we're, that to us is the super conscious. Now, we would call it poetically the kingdom of the gods. The analytic psychologists call it collective unconscious. So we would be very remiss in the same way that when we looked at the subconscious, we would have been very remiss if we hadn't looked at Sigmund Freud. So now it's time to look at the person who coined the word collective unconscious, and that is Carl Gustav Jung. So let's look at that for just a few minutes and see. Now, again, please remember we're going to look at one or two little things only. The entire horoscopes of both Freud and Jung will be covered in the next several years in a regular class during the school year, autumn and spring, 6 classes a year, 6 classes a semester, and it'll take several years, about 3 or 4 years, I think. Now, in the past 25 years or so, I have read thousands and thousands of pages from the works of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. And right now I'm in the process of reading multi-volumes of biography on their lives. And in the course of these studies, my understanding of these two people has changed quite a bit, especially my understanding of Carl Jung. And finally now, after all these years, things are becoming clear. Now, one of the changes is, I thought, for example, that Carl Jung was a materialist. And I no longer think that. I think that Carl Jung is a concretist. Things have to be concrete for him to deal with them. And there's a big difference between something being concrete and something being materialistic. A materialist is someone who believes matter is the origin of everything, and that doesn't describe Jung, though it does describe Freud. It's close to what Jung is in some ways, but in some ways not. A concretist is someone who sees everything in concrete terms. In his own words, Carl Jung says, he has never in his life, from childhood on, been capable of pure abstraction. And pure abstraction is even doubtful to him. He understands that some people function in what is called pure abstraction, but he doesn't know that it is. Very late in life, he became interested in looking into purely spiritual abstract things, but most of his life not. When he was in his 80s, he did. Now, for example, what I'm trying to say is he can understand 3 objects, 3 pieces of chalk or 3 chairs or something like that, but he does not understand threeness. Threeness is something that is completely foreign to his consciousness. This is almost literally from his own words in his own autobiography. He can abstract from concrete things. If he has concrete facts, he can abstract, and he can do quite well. We can see that. He has Saturn trine Jupiter. It's a pretty strong trine, and that is excellent for abstracting. They're in air signs, and air signs are the signs of facts and knowledge and things like that. But Saturn is in the first house, and Saturn is concretion. If you just took Saturn in the first house all alone, this would be a concretistic intellectual. Probably the most intellectual of all signs. Though people like that have massive amounts of knowledge are people who have strong Aquarian foci. All right. Saturn forms 3 major aspects. It forms a sextile to Jupiter, which is a mechanical understanding, and his understanding of the mechanics of the soul are excellent. As a practical psychologist, I think he is really, really good. Both he and Freud were astounding what they did in their practices. I'm not that keen on all of their theory because they're found wanting, but that's way too big for us to go into now. And it forms a trine to Jupiter, and what do you know? He has the same Saturn square Pluto that we saw with Arthur Conan Doyle. And this shows, again, in his case, Carl Jung never became darkly pessimistic because the Jupiterian quality was far too strong, but he was very doubtful. And his doubtfulness was, in a way, a positive thing. In terms of intellectual integrity, it's very hard to find somebody that has a better intellectual integrity than Carl Jung. What he knows, he knows. Now, his concept of the unconscious collective unconscious has absolute qualities. Absolute. The Saturn Pluto is, this is the fact of it, it's absolute and it's unchangeable. And his view was, because Saturn is the key to the 12th house, and we're trying to understand that collective unconscious. In his terms, you cannot know the unconscious. And to us, that is anathema. Our whole quest in spiritual development is to enter into the worlds that he calls the collective unconscious and to function in them freely and creatively. Basically what he says, which is very Saturn-Pluto, he says we have to accept our destiny and work with it. We deal with what the collective unconscious gives to us. And the best we can do is integrate it into our character. He never practiced meditation, never practiced prayer, and he said outright he didn't think that meditation did any good. I don't want to go too far in that because it'll take us off. So he was speaking from integrity, but he did not see the world as we see the world. He would call us theosophists, and he was very negative about theosophists. His statement in what I consider his best book, a book that I believe that every astrologer should read, it is called Personality Types. I have read the book 4 times, and probably given the spare time, I will read it a 5th time. Because his understanding of typology is wonderful. He understands people really, really well. But in there, his statement about, he says, well, this kind of typology brings a person to be a theosophist. And a theosophist is somebody that has too many answers. He never asks whether those answers are true or not. They have too many answers. And in other places in his writing, he disparages what we try to do. Late in life, he did address some of these things, but he said he had no concrete evidence about them. Now, his view was that he was dealing only with psychological fact, and that was it. Now, all of this is not to criticize Carl Jung, because he was brilliant. You can't put a person down. He has written some of the best things I've ever read. The reason for this is to demonstrate that the kingdom of the gods, or the 12th house, can be described in very different ways. And this is what happens when you view it from the viewpoint of somebody who's completely concrete about everything. He never gives a complete definition of the collective unconscious. In one place he says it has to do with the formation of the brain. which is interesting. In another place he says it has to do with our past evolution that is built sort of like in a psychic DNA that we carry with us. And he has various statements. In another statement he says it's very much like Platonic ideas, which is pretty pretty accurate. I'm sorry. Again, just for a few seconds in closing, this is another person that has a lot of planets in the 7th house or in the West in general. Another person who has love in the 6th house. Another person who really loved his patients and did very well by his patients. Did remarkable things. For example, he had a patient from the United States that was doing counseling with him or doing therapy with him, and he brought something out of her, and she went into a snit, and she got angry, and she left and said she was never going to have anything to do with him again. And about 2 years later, he told his secretary, make an appointment for this woman. She's about ready now in her psyche to come back. And sure enough, shortly after that, they got the call and she came. The appointment was already made. But it's again the case of the great practical psychologists put themselves into the other person. You cannot be woo. You cannot be too much of a personality if you're going to work with the phenomena of taking on the other person and they taking on you, and then you give and take back and forth until the other person is free. It's all of it is like co-counseling, and 7th house is the house of co-counseling. All right, we didn't have a whole lot to say, but we did look at the collective unconscious as the 12th house, and that's about all we have for today, so we'll close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Richard, I took some classes at the Jungian Institute in Los Angeles, and I saw the film, which they did of Carl Jung later in his life, and they asked him, do you believe in God?
Yeah.
And he said, I don't believe, I know.
Yes, I know that. I'm familiar with that. I saw that movie, and I've seen the quote in various different... The way he knows God is concretistic. He had visions, but the visions were not clairvoyant. He had visions that only came through symbols. For him, the symbol is the all.
And he had a Christian background as opposed to forward.
Well, yeah, but that he rebelled against. Yes, because...
But yet he believes in God, whereas Freud didn't.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So do you think Freud's religion had anything to do with...
Freud was interested in Judaism, but more as a tradition and more the psychology of that tradition. Both of them were highly interested in the psychology of religion, but not necessarily in the spiritual content. And Freud wrote these wonderful things about Moses and things like that are very interesting. In fact, he thought the original Oedipal complex had to do with Akhenaten and Tutankhamun and Nefertiti. That was the original triangle. So. Well,
Richard?
Yes.
What made you decide to continue with this study?
I'm interested in pure psychology because the things that he sees as practical ways to apply psychological understanding are excellent.
Or what?
Are excellent. Very good.
And you can apply them.
Yeah. Yes. And he addresses really interesting issues. Issues that I really want to dig into. I don't necessarily agree with him, but where else do you find, unless you read Neoplatonists hand over fist, where else do you find a lot of interpretation of myths?
Oh, that's
yeah.
He still does.
Sounds that's right.
I had a question. How did you define clairvoyance?
Clairvoyance means, the word literally means clear seeing, and it means that you are capable of seeing in realms that interpenetrate this physical world and that are causally antecedent to this world, which means that this world is a precipitate, sort of like the precipitate that you get out of at the bottom of a tea kettle. And they're a precipitate of higher spiritual worlds, which is where the creativity comes from, that becomes manifest and externalized in this world, and then from the experience of that, the meaning of the experience is taken back into the spirit. And the ability to see in those worlds, because we're part of them, they are in us, the ability to have perception, direct perception in those worlds is called clairvoyance.
I hope you'll come for dinner out of my place, which is on the schedule. So you're all invited. I hope to see you. Can you tell me how you do? Yeah.
The dinner. You going to go to the dinner?
Yeah. Listen closely. Okay.
I'm going to sleep.
I'm having a classical schedule at home. I'll be able to make it into class, but I'm going home.
Okay.
It's very frustrating because I just didn't realize this week that there are other things to do. I've said this to you. I have the red book.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
If you want to put it out for people to read.
I think the quickest way, if you
Stuff that he pasted.
take John and drive out.
I have everything but that.
Yeah.
I have, you ever seen Man and His Symbols? It's a great big picture book. I've got that. Somebody gave that to me many years ago, and I don't even know who it was.
And take the sign that says to Wisconsin, Delaware, Milwaukee, and that will take you north on.
Why don't you make a map off of MapQuest or Google Maps or something like that?
Yeah. So you take 94 north and then 90 north and then 94 west.
No, 94 east.
No, you
Toward Milwaukee.
94 west.
I was watching it last night. Why do you take 94 west to get to 94 east? But that's what the sign said.
It's easier to just go through town. They're moving fast. It's on the highway. You're much better off going back to the town and just plodding your way right through.
Because I noticed that, and I thought it was really strange. Why is this saying 94 west? But it did, and then when you get to 94, then you take 94.
When we have the regular class. When we have the regular class in fall. Yeah, I think that would be better, because this is a lot of activity, and this is something we don't want to, you don't want to get a book torn or something like that, and we're not going to deal anymore with, we're going to deal some with Sigmund. Yeah.
621 Harvest Lane.
Oh, blackboard.
And I'll tell you the simple way, if you don't mind going through town, and that's a good way to go too. Yeah. If you know how to get to 151, do you know? Take 151 northeast. That goes to Sun Prairie, and then you take the Main Street exit. When you get on Main Street, you go east, and you just go all the way through town. To the east side, there will be a mobile station and a Koepsel grocery store on the east side. Go about one more block to Musket Ridge. Musket Ridge, just go left on Musket, that's north. And just keep going. It must be about a half a mile to the top of the hill. And turn left, that's Harvest Lane. And I'm on Harvest Lane. Fourth house.
Blocks after the stop sign, where you used to live.
It's just really kind of a block, depending on how you,
Yeah.
whether you're looking left or right. It's about a block past the stop sign. That's the top of the hill. Turn left, and then the fourth house on the left.
Sun Prairie, what's the highway there? 19, isn't it?
Yeah. Main Street is 19 when you get to the east side.
What's this one that comes off of here? Pilgrim, isn't it?
Pilgrim is the stop sign where she used to live.
Oh, okay.
Well, Highway 19.
Okay.
No, the Pilgrim.
All right, what is this one that comes off of Highway 19 when you turn off?
Musket Ridge.
Musket.
I've been finding my way there.
And yours is what?
That's not quite right.
Sure it is.
All right, so it's...
This is Highway N going north,
Yeah.
and this is 19.
Yeah.
Musket comes here.
No, when you come on 19, this is north. We're going north. This is north.
Oh, okay, upside down.
Yeah. So see, this is Lakeside, and you take Lakeside to John Nolan till you get on the Beltline, and in the Beltline you take I-90 till I-94 till Highway N till Highway 19 into Musket, and what's yours is what? What is it?
Harvest.
Harvest.
Yeah. Okay.
And what is the address?
21.
Harvest. A lot of work.
Do we bring anything?
Anytime after the class ends at 3:30. Richard gave us a big dinner both times so we could have a relaxed dinner. And so from 3:30 to 7:30.